Evan's message that day, my own son, was just one line, but cold enough to snuff out an entire holiday season. Dad, my mother-in-law says you don't need to come for Thanksgiving this year. It won't make any difference if you're not here. Some words don't need to be shouted to hurt. They only need to be sent at the right moment, to the right person, in the middle of a crowded Portland market, where everyone is picking out turkeys and laughing with their families, while I stood frozen in the produce aisle, feeling like the whole world had just gone silent for a beat. People don't realize betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. It comes from the very child you raised with every night shift, every saved dollar, every year of a bent back. Late November in Portland has a strange kind of cold, not sharp enough to make you shiver, but deep enough to remind you the holidays are coming. Holidays that should have been warm, filled with laughter, filled with family. I parked my old Ford Transit in the New Seasons lot, tugged up the collar of the sheepskin jacket Linda bought me 10 years ago, and walked into the crowd scrambling for Thanksgiving groceries. The familiar smell hit immediately: dried herbs, fresh apples, chilled turkey. I pushed the cart slowly down the spice aisle, picking up rosemary. Evan once said, "Dad makes the best turkey in Multnomah County." I still remember the year he ate 2 servings, and Marissa said I cooked like a chef from Pioneer Square. That was the year before Deborah, the mother-in-law, moved in with them. The year before things started to change color. I bent to choose a bag of sweet potatoes, pressing my thumb lightly against the skin to check the ripeness. Every movement was muscle memory from past holiday seasons. Another year, another small tradition. I thought this year would be the same. But life has a way of throwing cold water at exactly the right and cruel moment. My phone buzzed. I thought Evan was asking what dessert I wanted. That's how he is. Always texting instead of calling. Always busy. Always booked with clients. Always being pulled by Marissa into home decor projects for the new house. But when the screen lit up, my eyes stopped for a long time. Evan, "Dad, Mom-in-law said you're not welcome this year. Marissa thinks it's better this way." I read it once, then twice, then a third time. The words didn't change. No softness, no hesitation, not a single apology, just not welcome. And that it's better. A woman beside me picking cranberries glanced over. Maybe my face looked awful or stupid or both. A young guy pushing past knocked a magazine off my cart. When he bent to pick it up, he caught the message on my screen and mumbled, Sorry, sir?" No one in that market knew what happened, but the way I stood there, like I'd been bolted to the floor, made a few heads turn. My hands went so cold I almost dropped the phone. I typed a few words, erased them. Typed again, erased again. After all these years, after helping pay for their house worth over $500,000, one sentence from his mother-in-law was enough to shove me out the door? I didn't send what I typed. Pride dies before it's ever written. In the end, I sent just one word. All right. Sent. Light as air. But the sound it made leaving my life, sharp as a blade. I put the sweet potatoes in the cart, but my hands were shaking so badly that they fell. I picked them up, set them back, and pushed my cart to checkout, head full of fog. The cashier was a 20-something with pink-dyed hair and kind eyes. She scanned the potatoes and said casually, "Holiday alone? That's rough, sir. Hope you'll be okay." Just small talk, no malice, but it hit straight to the chest. I nodded, paid, and carried the 2 bags outside. The doors slid open, and cold wind hit my face. People kept laughing, choosing turkeys, planning menus. The whole world was preparing to gather. And I had just been told by my own son that I was unnecessary at the table my money helped build. The parking lot was packed. I opened the transit, set the bags on the passenger seat, and placed my hand on the brown folder resting quietly on the dashboard. The folder for the Beaverton house transfer is worth $620,000. I signed it yesterday morning at the notary's office near Southwest Hall Boulevard. Inside the folder, the smell of new paper and barely dried ink still lingers. I open the folder again. Just yesterday, I was signing each page with the pride of a father who believed he was giving a worthy gift. I believed that decision was the right thing, that it would help Evan build the steady life I once dreamed for him. And I foolishly thought this Thanksgiving would be the first year I'd feel a little less empty since Linda passed. I flipped to the addendum page. 45-day rescission window for donor protection. My eyes stopped there for a long time. A very, very long time. Wind slips through the door seam, colder than any winter I ever faced as a firefighter. Cold like Evan's one short text, cutting down years of sacrifice. I lean back in the seat, watching other cars pass by. I understand now, I think. My goodwill, the goodwill of a father who spent 33 years on a fire hose, who saved every spare dollar so his son could have a home, has been treated like trash. And some things, once thrown in the trash, you do not need to pick back up. I close the folder, start the engine, and know my life is about to turn in a direction no one in Evan's family will be ready for. That night, Portland wasn't the city of coffee and red maples anymore. It was just a blur of yellow streetlights sliding across the transit's windshield as I drove home from the new season's parking lot, like a man whose blood had been drained, but was still pretending he was fine. The small house in Southeast Portland, where Linda and I lived for nearly 30 years, greeted me with exactly one thing: silence. No smell of roasted turkey, no TV humming a Thanksgiving cooking show like every other year. Just the wall clock ticking in sharp, empty beats, like the sound of a firefighter's boots hitting the concrete bay back in the day. I set the grocery bags on the kitchen table without unpacking a single thing. One bag of sweet potatoes, one bunch of rosemary, some onions, and a sack of fresh cranberries. A full dinner for a family. And I had only myself. I stood still for a few minutes, both hands resting on the worn wooden edge of the table. Linda used to say, "If I go first, promise me you'll still make a proper Thanksgiving dinner, even if it's just you." I had nodded, like an old romantic fool, thinking that promise would shield me from loneliness. Turns out some loneliness doesn't come from the dead. It comes from the living who turn their backs. I dropped my coat over a chair and walked to the small room at the end of the hallway, my office. In there, the past was still intact. Commendations from Portland Fire and Rescue, photos with the crew, faces streaked with soot, but smiling after every fire we put out. I switched on the light. The warm glow fell onto the picture of Linda holding Evan when he was 3, him wearing a toy firefighter helmet, grinning ear to ear. I looked at that picture longer than I meant to. Then I pulled the tall back chair over to the gray metal filing cabinet beside the desk. That cabinet is a part of me. 3 drawers, each labeled carefully. Fire Dept, Service Records, Personal Finance, Aldridge, Evan, Support and Loans. I opened the first drawer out of habit. Inside were yellow folders with frayed edges. Fire reports from 1907 to 2019. I pulled out a thin stack and flipped to a random page. Structure Fire, SE Division, St. December 2003. The moment I read the line, the memory surged back. A 2-story house burning bright, glass shattering. A woman screaming her child's name from the yard. I remembered the ladder groaning under my weight. The heat pouring off the rafters so hot, the steam rose from my turnout gear like smoke. One slip would have dropped me straight onto the fire. I flipped again. Another report. Warehouse fire, North Portland, May 2011. That night, a steel beam collapsed less than 2 feet from me. When I took my helmet off, a whole patch of my hair was singed. Linda pretended to scold me afterward, but later in bed, her hand kept brushing that burnt patch, like she needed to reassure herself. Still here. Didn't lose you. 33 years running into fire. And what did it buy me? A pension just big enough to survive, a few plaques on a wall, and a body that groans every morning under the weight of old injuries. I closed the first drawer and opened the second. Personal finance, Aldridge. Here was everything I did after leaving the department. The contract for managing the warehouse at Cascade Freight Logistics. Steady paychecks, modest but clean, plus my 5-year savings plan for the Beaverton House project. I pulled that plan out. The handwriting was mine. The blue ink, the kind Linda always loved. Year 1, cut all vacations, save at least $18,000. Year 2, sell the Harley, clear the remaining loan, push the surplus into the house fund. Year 3, take night shifts for 9 months, add $14,000. Year 4 to 5, eat cheap, buy nothing I didn't need, maximize savings. Reading it back, the corner of my mouth lifted, not out of pride, but out of the sad realization that to give my son a home in Beaverton, I had lived like a broke bachelor, well past the age I should have been resting. No Harley, no Mount Hood, no road trips, just night shifts, dawn shifts, weekend shifts, and simple meals in a quiet kitchen. Was it worth it? I asked the empty room. No answer came, only the whisper of paper moving. I opened the third drawer. Evan, support and loans. The heaviest drawer in the cabinet, literally and figuratively. First file, wedding 2014. Hotel invoices from the Gorge, band fees, catering and photographer. Total $42,300. A small note beside it, written in capital letters. Gift, no repayment. Dad. I remembered the night before the wedding. Evan's hand on my shoulder, eyes glossy. I'll never forget this, Dad. Once things settle down, I'll take you to Mount Hood. A real vacation. Mount Hood still just sits on a postcard. Next file. Hyundai Sonata, 2017. $18,000 transfer to cover the down payment to avoid steep interest. A printed text message. I'll pay it back in 18 months, promise. I had underlined promise in red. Not to guilt him, just to remind myself, I'm not asking, I'm just keeping track. Third file, medical bills, 2019. Marissa's appendicitis surgery. Insurance covered part, the rest was $9,500. I wired it in one transaction. Marissa emailed, "Thank you, Frank, we owe you so much." I printed it and clipped it in, one of the rare moments someone acknowledged what I did. Fourth file, furniture 2021, new apartment. IKEA lists, West Elm receipts, and a boutique shop that Marissa loved. Total $15,500. Every delivery slip carried Marissa's careful signature. Received, Marissa Aldridge. I kept a smaller receipt printed from an email. We really appreciate you helping us make this place feel like home. Signed, Marissa. And that wasn't all. Beyond the big payments were 100 small ones, scribbled on sticky notes. 3 times 20. $200. We'll pay back next payday. 7/2022, $2,500. Rescued a maxed out credit card. 1/2023, $3,000. Marissa's business idea. Added together almost 10 years, the total sat on a single crumpled A4 sheet. Total documented support, $285,000. Approx. I stared at the number for a long time. Strange how putting something on paper suddenly gives it shape. I leaned back in the chair, eyes fixed on that line. $285,000. A house for my son. A retirement cut in half. And in return, a text. You're not welcome this year. I inhaled slowly and flipped back through the medical bills 2019 file because I saw the corner of a paper peeking out. It was a small receipt I'd forgotten about. In the top corner, the logo of a little furniture store in the Alberta Arts District. Across the middle, handwritten in blue ink. Thank you, Frank. We couldn't have done this without you. Marissa, 2016. I touched the ink. Her handwriting slanted, soft. Back then, she used to call me the steady one, the person she said she could rely on when her own family life was too chaotic. You know, Linda once told me, she didn't grow up with a father like you. She doesn't understand the value of what you do, but she'll learn. I wanted to believe that, but tonight, in this room full of cold paper, It sounded less like a prediction and more like a prayer. I set the receipt down and reached for another folder at the very back of the drawer. A transparent plastic sleeve. Inside it, a printed copy of Evan's iCloud info, left over from the time he asked me to help transfer their wedding photos onto an external drive. I'd kept the copy out of habit, not curiosity. A sticky note on top, iCloud, Aldridge family, 2016-2022. Probably irrelevant, I muttered, but still slid it out. Inside were pages of account settings, device lists, and email confirmations. I flipped through quickly, eyes scanning lines. Evan's iPhone, Marissa's MacBook, shared album, family trip Cannon Beach. Then a smaller line near the bottom of page 2 made my eyes freeze. Shared iCloud access, Marissa and Deborah Langford. I went completely still. Not because Deborah, Evan's mother-in-law, showed up for the first time in paperwork that should have only concerned the Aldridge household, but because of the 2 words before her name. Shared access. Shared access. Shared messages. Shared photos. Shared notes. Shared secrets. I lifted the page closer to the warm desk lamp. My heartbeat slowed, not from age, but from that old instinct, the one that used to tell me when a roof was about to collapse in a structure fire. Some part of me understood instantly. Tonight wasn't just about being erased from a Thanksgiving table. It was something bigger, deeper, darker, and whatever it was hiding somewhere in these harmless-looking lines. I placed the sheet labeled Shared iCloud Access, Marissa and Deborah Langford, in the center of the table. And for the first time in my life, I felt not just like a man suffering someone's ingratitude, but like a target in someone's plan. The next morning, Portland was covered in a thin layer of mist, like someone's breath standing right beside me. I sat in the kitchen holding the mug Linda used to love, light green with a hairline crack along the rim. The smell of Arabica filled the air, but the taste felt weaker than usual. Maybe it wasn't the coffee. Maybe it was the person drinking it. In front of me lay a whole scatter of papers, old bills, receipts, printed messages, each one a small milestone of sacrifice and silence. I leaned back in the chair, staring at those pages as if I were staring back at the 10 years that had slowly shaved parts of me away. And then, for the first time, I realized something frightening. Not just ingratitude, a pattern. I pulled the Evans Support and Loans folder toward me and turned each page slowly. After every major thing I helped with, the wedding, the car, the hospital bill, the furniture, there followed a stretch of time when Evan grew more distant, fewer calls, fewer visits, shorter messages, and every time we met, his eyes looked as if he were bracing for me to ask for something. What did I raise? I whispered to myself. I opened my banking app and stared at the transfer from the day before. Over $620,000 glowing on the screen like a wound. I called Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo customer support. How can I assist you? I explained. I had just signed a gift deed transferring a house to my son, but a troubling message afterward made me question the validity of my donative intent. The line was quiet for a moment before the woman responded in a low, professional tone. Mr. Aldridge, for gift deed property transfers in Oregon, if within 45 days there is evidence of coercion, deception, or significant ingratitude, the donor may request cancellation or rescission. I asked, what counts as significant ingratitude? It's not strictly defined in statute, but common examples include exclusion from important family events immediately after receiving the asset, public insults, and clear acts of disrespect, as long as you have evidence. Evidence. The word hit me like a fire station ladder, crashing onto concrete. I ended the call. My hand holding the phone trembled slightly. That afternoon, I needed supplies to repair part of the roof. I drove to Home Depot on SE 82nd Ave, a place I knew as well as the faces of the firefighters I used to run into burning buildings with. I didn't expect to see Deborah there, but life loves its little jokes. In the concrete and tools section, I heard her heels before I saw her. Deborah. Curled hair, perfume so thick it smothered the smell of pine around me. She stood beside Marissa, voice loud. I told you, Frank only bought that house to control them. Old men like him love pulling strings, so people feel indebted. Disgusting. Several men looking at lumber turned their heads. A young mason frowned. A mother pushing a stroller stopped, their eyes waiting to see how I reacted. Marissa said nothing. She bit her lip, stared down, but didn't defend me. I quietly placed a box of screws in my cart and tried to walk past without looking, but Deborah raised her voice. Look at him, old and still trying to play hero. What kind of father-in-law tracks every dollar he gives? Someone behind them whispered, Jesus. This time a cashier near the paint counter looked at me, calm but clearly bothered. Sir, they shouldn't talk to you like that. A simple sentence, but enough to tighten my throat. I nodded, pushed my cart away, but behind the aisle I pulled out my phone. Oregon is a one-party consent state. Only one person in the conversation has to know they're being recorded. I hit record from Deborah's very first sentence. I'm not the type who collects evidence for revenge, but I was a firefighter for 33 years. I know when a fire has just started crawling across the ceiling, and Deborah was the spark. Back home, I opened my laptop and connected my phone. The audio file was almost 6 minutes long. Every word Deborah said was clear, crisp, not a trace of background noise. I listened once. My heartbeat was slow, steady, hard, like a rescue hammer hitting steel. I opened an email and typed in the address of the man I never thought I'd need again, Harold Kim, the attorney who handled my home sale back in 2020. Strict, good, and sharper than anyone I know when it comes to Oregon property law. I attached the recording, attached Evan's message, attached our photos of the money transfers, attached the page labeled Shared iCloud Access, Marissa and Deborah Langford, email subject line, urgent, possible donor, coercion, rescission grounds. I leaned back, hand resting on the trackpad, staring at the screen, sadness, anger, disappointment, all mixing into a metallic taste in my mouth. I hit send. 8 seconds later, the little airplane icon disappeared. The email was gone. Since Linda died, nothing had made my heart pound like that. I got up to pour a glass of water. The phone buzzed before I took a sip. Harold Kim, incoming call. Time, 4 minutes after the email. I set the glass down, wiped my hands on my jeans, and answered. Frank, I listened to the recording, Harold said, voice low but firm. You need to come to my office first thing tomorrow morning. We have a very strong case. The next morning, Portland had a light rain, the kind that isn't heavy enough to get a coat wet, but heavy enough to gray the sky, heavy enough to make everything feel heavier for someone who just got through a long night. I drove the transit down Southwest 6th Avenue, past the mist-soaked trees of downtown Portland. Harold Kim's office was on the 12th floor of a silver-gray glass building, the kind of place where the most expensive attorneys in the city worked. I had stepped into this place once, in 2020, when I sold the house, Linda, and I had lived in before moving somewhere smaller. Harold had closed that deal for me in just 3 weeks. A small Korean man with eyes sharp as a scalpel. A man like me, a former firefighter, only needs 3 seconds to know who can be trusted, and Harold was one of them. The elevator opened. The receptionist led me to a large glass conference room overlooking the Willamette River. Harold was already there, hands on his laptop, the folder I'd sent the night before sitting in front of him. He looked at me and pointed to the chair. Sit down, Frank. I listened to the entire recording. I sat. My heartbeat was slow but heavy. Harold didn't stall. He opened the file and flipped through every page I had sent. Evan's text, the wire transfers, the 10 years of loans, the Beaverton house paperwork, the Deborah Langford Home Depot audio, the shared iCloud Access Marissa and Deborah Langford page. He tapped his pen on the table. Frank, your case is so clear that I'm surprised you didn't come to me sooner. I exhaled long. Harold, I don't even know where to start. I thought I was doing the right thing. You did, Harold said, looking straight at me. But they didn't. He opened the Oregon statute on gift deeds. ORS 93.040. Gift rescission grounds. Harold read each line slowly. A gift deed may be revoked if the recipient displays gross ingratitude. Excluding the donor from an important family event immediately after the transfer is considered evidence against donative intent. Public insults or demeaning behavior toward the donor are considered strong proof of gross ingratitude. Any influence, pressure, or manipulation from a third party to steer the recipient's actions is valid grounds for rescission. Harold opened a comparison page. You have all three. I couldn't speak. Harold slid a packet toward me. Revocation packet, Beaverton property transfer. About half an inch thick, clipped at the corner with a silver paperclip. Before we go further, Harold said, I need to confirm something. The gift deed between you and Evan was notarized using Aron, remote online notary, correct? I signed over video call with Amanda Foster, I said. She verified my ID, matched the documents, and sent the stamped version. Perfect, Harold said immediately. Aron means no one can dispute validity, and Aron preserves a video of the signing. I looked up. The video for what? To prove you were completely lucid and voluntary, Harold said. That's step 1. Step 2. Proving your donative intent was destroyed by gross ingratitude. He emphasized those 3 words. Then he picked up his pen and underlined a line on the first page of the revocation packet. Grounds for rescission, coercion, and gross ingratitude. I asked quietly, Harold, is this really strong enough? He looked at me, steady, without a grain of doubt. Frank, I've practiced 20 years. Let me be blunt. What you gave me last night is basically a complete textbook example of why a gift deed should be revoked. It is so strong that I honestly don't know why they thought they could treat you this way. I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my ribs for a decade. Harold handed me a metal body pen, cool to the touch. You need to sign here, he said, turning the packet toward me. 4 places. Every signature is one step toward taking back what you spent a lifetime earning. I set the pen to the paper. My hand shook slightly. Not from fear, from grief, from realizing something men like me try not to think about. Wanting to be a father doesn't always mean you get to be one. I bent down and signed all 4 lines as instructed, each stroke firm, each line like a period, marking the end of a long chapter of being underestimated. When I finished, Harold checked every signature, gathered the papers into a hard folder, and nodded. Revocation packet complete, he said. I'll send the original to the Washington County Recorder's Office, and I'll send a copy to Evan. Once he receives that letter, Oregon law will be on your side. I swallowed. Harold, how do you think Evan will react? Harold closed the folder, pushed it toward me like a verdict, and said, in a voice clear enough that I remember every word, Frank, when Evan receives that certified letter, his entire household will blow apart. I turned off my phone's ringer the moment I left Harold's office, not to ignore Evan, but because I knew if I heard his voice while my head was still hot, I might say something I'd regret. Silence isn't always weakness. It's a seatbelt. The evening passed quietly. The phone buzzed in waves like summer mosquitoes outside a window. 19 missed calls from Evan. 7 long messages from Marissa. The last 2 were even from Deborah. Paragraphs full of scolding and angry emojis like an overgrown child. I didn't reply, not a single word. The next morning, Portland had heavy rain. The transit parked under the awning sounded like it was being tapped by time itself. I made coffee and opened the door to look at the wet yard. The phone buzzed again. This time it was Evan. Dad, please pick up. Bank said something's wrong with the house file. I opened the message, looked at it, then turned off the screen. Wells Fargo had surely updated the transfer status to under review. And by law, when a gift deed is requested for rescission, every loan application tied to the property is automatically frozen. Not long after, Marissa texted, "Frank, the bank didn't approve our $480,000 loan. They said DTI is too high because my mom lives with us. You know she's only staying temporarily. You're ruining our lives." I leaned against the wall and breathed in deeply. I wasn't ruining anything. They had built their lives on weak foundations. I simply pulled back my bricks. Around noon, I went to Trader Joe's for a few things. It was the store Linda loved the most, where two old people used to choose almond bags and salted butter as if it were a small kind of happiness. I had just grabbed a basket when I heard a voice familiar enough to raise every hair on my neck. Deborah. I didn't know if she had seen me first or waited for the perfect moment to speak, but her voice echoed across the frozen aisle. "Here he is. Everyone look. This is the most selfish father-in-law in Portland. Buys a house just to take it back. See? That's what two-faced men do." A few people by the fruit section turned. A young guy lifted his phone because her voice was too loud not to notice. Deborah stepped closer, pointing at me like making a public accusation. "He took back the house and nearly bankrupted my daughter and her husband. Think he's generous? It's all manipulation so he can keep his little collar of control." The whole store went quiet for a few seconds. A young woman whispered, "God, what is happening?" Someone else said, "That lady's going too far." But the more attention Deborah got, the louder she grew. "If anyone wants to record, go ahead. Let all of Portland see his true face." And just as she wished, I heard the ping of TikTok recording. Someone was filming. I didn't say a word, didn't explain, didn't react. I just set the peanut butter jar in my basket and walked straight to checkout. Behind me, Deborah screeched, "You're silent because you're guilty. Isn't that right, Frank?" The cashier looked at me with an apologetic expression and whispered, "Sir, if they're treating you like that, I'm really sorry. You don't deserve that." I gave her a small smile. "Thank you." Sometimes one kind sentence from a stranger is worth 100 apologies from blood family. That evening, the video of Deborah yelling at me in Trader Joe's had gone locally viral. I knew because a neighbor texted, "Frank, you're on TikTok. A lot of people are defending you in the comments." I opened the video. No emotion, just watched an older woman exposing her own character in front of thousands. And I stayed silent. Silent, but not still. I opened my email and typed to Harold, "Harold, let's move to the next step." Not even 3 minutes later, he replied, "I've drafted the loan demand. You just need to sign." I opened the PDF. Loan demand, $48,000, repayment due in 75 days. That number was the total of all the small advances Evan and Marissa had taken over the years and never paid back. Under Oregon law, once a gift deed is rescinded and misused financial support is proven, the donor has the right to demand repayment as a promissory debt. I signed electronically. The document was sent as a certified email. 1 minute later, Harold called, "Frank, the hard copy demand letter will be mailed out first thing tomorrow morning. When Evan receives it, he'll know this is only the beginning." I looked at the table where Linda's mug still held a faint trace of steam, and in that moment, I said to myself, in a voice lower than I expected, "It's time to reclaim what's mine." I used to think I had seen every kind of person in my life, the kind who'd risk death running into fire to save a stranger, the kind who stood outside with a phone held up, recording, the kind who cried for losing a home, the kind who laughed because insurance paid enough. But crossing into my 60s, I finally understood. There's a kind of person more dangerous than fire itself, the kind who lives off someone else's back and still believes they're the victim. Deborah Langford is one of those. Harold was the one who suggested hiring an investigator. "Frank, we already have the legal grounds to rescind the gift deed and reclaim the $48,000, he said. "But if you want this story to end in a way where no one dares call you the bad guy, we need the full truth, about Deborah. I leaned back in the conference room chair, looking at the Willamette shimmering with rain. "What does full truth mean, Harold?" He said one sentence. "It means letting the world see who's actually using whom." The next day, I met Marcus Hale, the private investigator Harold had trusted for over a decade. Marcus didn't look like a movie detective. No long coat, no fedora, no cigarette. He was in his 40s, in a blue shirt, holding an iPad, eyes sharp in the way of someone used to looking at what others hide. We sat in a quiet corner of a small cafe in Eni, Alberta, the smell of roasted beans mixed with the scent of rain on customers' coats. Marcus opened his iPad and placed it between us. "Mr. Aldridge," he said, voice low and steady, "I need you to repeat exactly what data you currently have lawful access to." I nodded. The family iCloud Evan shared with me when he got married. He said he wanted me to keep copies of all photos and important files in case he accidentally deleted something. Then, he never revoked that access. I can still see some shared items. I already gave Harold the printed settings page with the line, "Shared iCloud access, Marissa and Deborah Langford." Marcus listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded. "That's enough. I will only work on data you have lawful access to, plus public court and financial records. No hacking. Nothing illegal. You're safe." I exhaled. Having worked in public service, I wasn't about to cross into legal gray areas over family trouble. Marcus continued. "Based on what you've told me, I suspect Deborah is not just a difficult mother-in-law. People who shout first and think later often use that as a shell. Behind it is a very interesting financial history." Beam tapped the screen. "Give me 7 to 10 days. I'll come back with a clearer picture." I'm not a patient man, but decades of fighting fires taught me one thing. Waiting for an investigation beats rushing blindly into smoke. So I waited. On the 8th day, Marcus called. "Frank, I have it. Same place as before?" This time he arrived earlier than I did. 2 coffees on the table, one for him, one for me. Beside them, a thick folder in a clear plastic cover. Marcus slid the folder toward me. "This is Deborah Langford," he said. "Not the version she tells, the version the courts and banks recorded." I opened the folder. The first page bore the logo of the U.S. Federal Bankruptcy Court for the District of Oregon. United States Bankruptcy Court, Chapter 7 filing Deborah Ann Langford, 2022. I read every line carefully. Marcus summarized. Deborah filed Chapter 7 bankruptcy in May 2022. Total recorded debt, $63,000. Mostly supplier debt from a boutique clothing store she opened in Lake Oswego. He pointed to a table. "Here, fabric suppliers, accessory vendors, small shops, all marked unpaid over 180 days. In plain terms, she owed the money, then disappeared." I swallowed hard. "And the fraud Harold mentioned?" Marcus flipped to the next section. "Here, a 2019 case. Not criminal, but civil. A former partner sued Deborah for misrepresentation and fraudulent inducement, basically soliciting investment under false claims." He tapped a line. "The case ended in an out-of-court settlement. That usually means the other side had strong evidence. Deborah didn't dare go to court, so she paid something or signed something in exchange for closing the case." I stared at the pages, then at Marcus. "You're telling me that woman who screamed at me in Trader Joe's, calling me manipulative, went bankrupt, got sued for fraud, and is living off her daughter?" "Exactly," Marcus said calmly. "And that's just the public finances." He opened the iPad again. "Now for the shared iCloud." My heartbeat picked up. Marcus explained. "Since Evan shared the family iCloud with you and never revoked it, every shared album, shared note, or forwarded email thread remains in the zone you're allowed to view. I only downloaded what you yourself had legal access to." He showed me a printed thread. At the top, "From Deborah Langford to Marissa Langford. Subject, House and Frank. Dates stretching from 2020 to the present." Marcus pointed at one email from about a year ago. Don't be shy, honey. He has a pension, a paid-off house, and nothing else to spend on. Milk him. Old men exist to fund our comfort. I read it once, then twice, then a third time. Each word felt like acid dripped slowly onto skin. Milk him. Old men exist to fund our comfort. Marcus spoke softly. This email synced into the shared iCloud because Marissa forwarded part of it to Evan, then deleted her copy. But the metadata stayed in the backup you have access to. I set the page down and glanced out the cafe window. Outside, Portland lived its normal life. Someone walking a dog, a mother carrying her child across the street, a student running with headphones on. Nobody knew that in a small corner of this city, a 62-year-old man was reading the verdict of how he had been viewed in the dark. Marcus turned another page. Here is the messaging pattern between Deborah and Marissa before each major amount you transferred. He showed me, before the wedding. If he offers to pay, let him. Say thank you, but don't feel guilty. That's what fathers are for. Before the car purchase. Make him see it as an investment in your stability. Old men love that word, stability. Before the medical bills. Don't tell him the full insurance coverage. Let him think you need the whole amount. More is better. You never know when he runs out. My fists tightened, knuckles whitening. Marcus lowered his voice. Frank, do you see the pattern? Deborah wasn't just encouraging, she was scripting Marissa. Every phrase, every tone, every emotional angle. She turned you into a revenue stream. I couldn't answer. My throat was packed with cotton. After a long moment, I managed, What about Evan? Did he know about these emails? Marcus shrugged. Hard to say. I can only confirm he was in the middle. But the tone of that message, Dad, Mom-in-law said you're not welcome this year, doesn't sound like a man making his own choices. It sounds like someone repeating a script. He closed the folder and tapped the cover. Deborah lost her shop, lost her money, lost her credibility after bankruptcy in the 2019 case. She moved in with Marissa, paid no rent, no bills. To maintain her lifestyle, she needed a new financial source, and that source was you. I shut my eyes for a few seconds. I had been furious at Marissa, but now, sitting in front of Marcus, looking at these cold sheets of paper, that anger changed shape. It sharpened. It focused. No longer a vague, they're ungrateful, but a very specific name, Deborah Langford. Marcus said his final line, slow and clear, Sometimes the loudest person isn't the one in control. The real puppeteer stands behind, writing everyone's lines. I looked at the folder, then at him. In my mind, only one thought remained. I misjudged the scale. The one running this family was never Marissa. The real puppeteer has always been Deborah. A cliffhanger on the outside. But inside me, the story had just shifted into a new chapter. One where I was no longer the silent victim, but the man bringing light exactly where it needed to shine. If you want to know what a person truly is, don't look at how they behave online. Look at how they treat the very person who raised them. And that night, when I opened the door to my small wooden house in Selwood, Portland, I knew the moment to put the truth on the table had come. The family meeting wasn't my idea. Eleanor, my sister, forced me into it. Before we met, I had to tell her everything. The cold message Evan sent, the times Deborah humiliated me in public, the years of money I carried on my back for him, and the way his mother-in-law manipulated him until he could cut his own father out of Thanksgiving. By the time I finished, Eleanor's face had gone pale with anger. She didn't come alone. Henry, her son, a software engineer in Eugene, drove 2 hours to be there. Douglas, my cousin, former Coast Guard, also showed up with the look of a man ready for a military tribunal. When they walked in, the three of them looked at me like a wounded soldier sitting in the middle of the battlefield he had protected for 33 years. Eleanor put both hands on the wooden table. Frank, talk. What happened to Evan? So I told them. When I reached the part where Evan texted, Dad, Mom-in-law said you're not welcome this year. Henry shot up from his chair. He did what? Douglas hit the table, not at me, but at what Evan had become. I saw you pull 3 people out of that Jefferson Street fire in 2002, he said. No one has the right to treat you like that, especially not your own son. The air turned heavy, like smoke in a sealed room. Eleanor stared at me for a long moment, then pulled out her phone. Will he pick up? I asked. Don't care. She put it on speaker, dialed Evan, and the call connected. Hello? Evan's voice was tight and shaky. Eleanor spoke, slow and sharp. Evan Aldridge, we are having a family meeting. Everyone knows you threw Frank out of Thanksgiving. Do you want to explain to the whole family why you did it? Silence. Then Evan stammered. Aunt Eleanor, it's not as simple as... Douglas cut in, voice low and sharp as a knife. Simple or not, you still kicked your father out of a family dinner. The same man who saved lives in this city. Henry added, Did you forget who paid your college? Who covered your first business loan? Evan stayed silent, so silent that I felt my own heart stop for a beat. Eleanor ended the call with a sentence cold as Portland steel in January. When you're ready to face the truth, call back. Until then, do not show up to any family event. She hung up. No one spoke for a few seconds. Then Eleanor looked at me, eyes red, but voice steady. Don't worry. From now on, we stand with you. 20 minutes later, Henry held up his phone. I did it. Did what? I asked. He showed me the screen. A public Facebook post. Respect your elders. For 33 years, Frank Aldridge ran into fire to save strangers, and his own son told him he wasn't welcome at Thanksgiving. Let this be a reminder. Gratitude is not a guarantee. Douglas shared it instantly with the caption, Family is earned, respect is owed, betrayal is a choice. Eleanor posted in the family group, nearly 40 people. Marissa Langford, removed. Evan, under review. Reason, severe disrespect toward Frank. Notification popped up. Marissa Langford has been removed by admin. The feeling wasn't relief. It was justice landing where it belonged. Douglas grabbed his coat. The retired firefighters community is sharing the post like crazy. People are angry with you, Frank. I put the folders back into the drawer. And when I turned off the living room light, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. This was only the first explosion. The real one is still coming. And I was ready. The truth Marcus Hale dug up didn't just open my eyes. It dragged Evan's entire household into a straight vertical drop with nothing to grab onto. And it all started with 3 bank doors slamming shut in their faces. Evan and Marissa went to U.S. Bank first. The clerk looked at their file for less than a minute and said, Debt load is too high, household income isn't sufficient, and your mother-in-law's dependent status pushes the risk ratio over the limit. One sentence that hit 2 people who'd always assumed I would be their safety net. They moved on to KeyBank, begging, We just need a bridge loan for 45 to 60 days. The manager glanced at their credit report and answered flatly, We can't. The third door was Chase. Marissa was almost pleading, We have assets, we have jobs, we just need time. The Chase rep replied in a tone so neutral it felt cruel. You don't qualify, and your co-resident parent's financial history increases the risk. 3 banks, 3 failures, 3 hard stops. From that moment, Evan began to understand something I'd learned years ago. In life, no one saves you if you don't save yourself. While they were scrambling for money, Evan decided to sell the 2020 Subaru Crosstrek. It should have gone for around $24,000 on the market, but because they needed cash fast, they took the lowest offer, $15,000. $9,000 gone in one afternoon on a dusty lot off S.E. Powell Boulevard. It was the first time Evan didn't try to hide the failure. The first time his face looked exactly like mine did in 1994, watching my first house burn down, helpless, but suddenly awake. Marissa, though, hadn't hit that point yet. At IKEA, between birch tables and beige dining chairs, a co-worker of hers happened to see Marissa slumped over a shopping cart, sobbing like a child. People stared. A young couple whispered, "Maybe she got dumped." A mother murmured, "Probably money trouble." The shame spread through the showroom like the smell of Swedish meatballs in the air. No one had to say it out loud. Pity in their eyes was enough. For Marissa, those looks were more brutal than any words. The real explosion came when Evan got home. In the living room, Deborah was watching TV like nothing in the world concerned her. Evan threw Marcus's packet onto the coffee table. The printed breakdown of her debts, the Chapter 7 bankruptcy, the 2019 fraud case, and worst of all, the email where she told Marissa, "Milk him. Old men exist to fund our comfort." Deborah went pale. For the first time, she had no comeback. Evan pointed at the door, voice colder than I'd ever heard from him. "Pack your things, tonight, and don't ever contact our family again." Deborah screamed that he was ungrateful. Evan answered with one line, "Ungrateful is watching my mother-in-law turn my father into a walking ATM." 5 minutes later, she was out of the house. No one saw her off. The next morning, I got a notification from Wells Fargo. Wire transfer, $40,000. A big chunk, but still $8,000 short. No apology, no explanation, just a number. But I knew exactly what it was. The cash squeezed out of the Subaru, the furniture, and the last few friends willing to lend. I called Harold Kim immediately. "They sent $40,000, I said. Harold was silent for a few seconds, then asked, "And the rest?" I looked up at the line of Douglas firs outside my house, wind tearing through them like it was announcing a new chapter. "I want a loan agreement," I said slowly. 10% APR, signed by Ron within 24 hours, not a minute late. Harold replied, "Frank, you're teaching the final lesson." I exhaled. "No, I'm putting things back in order." On a Portland morning cold enough for breath to turn into smoke, I received something no one expected. A certified letter from Deborah Langford, 3 full pages accusing me of financial elder abuse, coercion, and manipulation. I opened the envelope right there in front of my house, and just a few lines in, the desperation in her words was obvious. I forwarded it straight to Harold Kim. 5 minutes later, he called back, reading through it with a dry laugh. "Frank, this letter is weaker than a wet noodle. I'm sending a cease and desist right now. If she keeps going, we'll countersue for defamation." That afternoon, investigator Marcus Hale sent me one final file, an iCloud backup transcript Marissa once forwarded, containing Deborah's line, sharp as an icy blade. "Make him so guilty, he'll sign anything." I read it again and again, not angry, not shocked, just chilled to the bone. Nothing she did was impulsive. It was deliberate, calculated over years with one goal only: drain me dry. Later that day, when I went to pick up documents at the company yard, Evan was standing at the far end of the parking lot, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes bloodshot. "Dad, I got the cease and desist." I didn't know Deb did that. I looked him straight in the eye. "You didn't know, but you let her live in your house for 2 years like a shadow." Evan lowered his head, voice shaking. "I'm sorry, but everything's gone too far." I stepped closer and spoke slowly, clearly, like delivering a verdict. "You're a son when you respect your father. But the day you threw your father out of Thanksgiving over your mother-in-law's words, that day you stopped being a son. You were just a sponsored dependent." Evan looked as if I'd struck him in the chest, eyes welling up. Then he broke down crying right there in the parking lot, in front of people walking by. "Dad, please, give me a chance. Just one chance." I didn't say anything, didn't comfort him, didn't scold him. I simply turned and walked away. Some wounds need silence more than words to sink into the skin of the one who needs to feel them. But driving home, I understood one thing. This wasn't the end. It was only the first moment Evan finally looked at himself. To know whether he was truly changing or merely panicking, I needed to put him through a test. One he couldn't perform, couldn't flee, couldn't blame anyone else for. And so the meeting at the logistics warehouse was set. A bare, simple place where every excuse falls flat onto cold concrete. There I would learn whether my son still had anything worth holding on to, or whether it was time to let him go. I told Evan to meet me at the logistics warehouse, where I'd worked 5 years of extra shifts to save for the $620,000 house I gave him. But I arrived 20 minutes early and deliberately made him wait outside in the cold as the first test. He came early too, stood in front of the warehouse, looking around and checking his phone over and over. At one point, he walked a few steps as if he might leave, but he turned right back to the exact spot and stood still. Then he kept glancing up at the glass door again and again, clearly afraid I might change my mind. Enough time passed for his anxiety to show plain on his face, but he didn't get angry. He didn't leave. And just the fact that he didn't get angry or walk away told me he was finally beginning to mean it. When I walked in, Evan stood up instantly, his voice shaking like someone had splashed cold water across his face. "Dad, thank you for coming." I set the folder on the table and said straight, "Talk, no circling." Evan told everything for the first time without blaming anyone. He admitted he'd let Marissa and Deborah manipulate him, admitted he stayed silent when I was kicked out of Thanksgiving, and admitted he'd turned me into a wallet instead of a father. When he said, "I made you ashamed because of me," his voice cracked, and finally he broke down. Not the kind of crying meant to beg forgiveness, but the kind that happens when a man finally sees what he's become. I didn't comfort him. This part he had to walk through alone. Then Evan said something that made me tilt my head a bit. "Marissa has started therapy. She says she wants to change, to cut her mother's influence completely, and she's asking for a chance to talk to you, only when you're ready." I stayed silent for a few seconds, then said only, "Good, but between me and Marissa, it's not time yet." Evan didn't argue. That alone was bigger than any apology. I opened the folder and took out the loan agreement we'd signed by Ron the night before. 10% APR, 12 months, fixed payments. "I'll pay it back in full," he said. I handed him the final page, the boundary sheet I'd written myself. 1. No asking for money. 2. No borrowing money. 3. No bailouts. 4. Absolute respect. 5. Any violation, the relationship ends with no notice. Evan read every line, his face going pale, but he signed without asking questions, without negotiating. "All I'm asking for is the chance to prove. I deserve to be your son," he said. I stood up. "A chance isn't something you say. It's something you do." Evan asked, "Dad, what's the next step?" I answered at the doorway, "A trial dinner, no gifts, no money, no acting. Just 3 people. You, me, and the truth." Then I walked away, leaving Evan sitting alone in the middle of the logistics warehouse, Portland's evening light falling across his face, a face still full of mistakes, but for the first time, bowed in the right direction. Evan and Marissa's new apartment was so empty that every footstep echoed like in a storage unit. A folding table in the middle of the room, 3 mismatched chairs, a dim yellow light, and a kitchen with just 1 pot and a few scattered bowls. No trace of the old arrogance, no scent of Deborah, only 3 people trying to see whether there was anything left in this family worth saving. Evan opened the door, his eyes still red. "Dad, thank you for coming." Marissa stood behind him, hands knotted together with nerves. We sat down, the air tight as a freshly tuned string. Marissa spoke first, her voice trembling but real. "Frank, I'm sorry. Not sorry to be forgiven. Sorry because I was wrong. I let my mother run me. I let her pour poison into me, but it's my fault, not hers." She lowered her head, her voice cracking. If Linda were still alive, she'd be most disappointed in me. I looked her straight in the eyes, no dodging, no blame-shifting, no defensive walls. For the first time, Marissa was speaking with her own voice, To test that honesty, I told them a firefighting story I'd never told them before. The one from 2003, inside a warehouse burning at 800 degrees when collapsing beams nearly blew my air tank. When I finished, Evan didn't ask the shallow questions people usually ask. He only said quietly, "Dad, I'm sorry I forgot you once risked your life so other people could have a warm dinner, and I'm sorry I threw you out of ours." Marissa's eyes reddened too. "I didn't know you'd been through things like that. I'm ashamed of myself." No defensiveness, no excuses, no counterattacks. Second test, passed. After dinner, Evan stood up and spoke with the voice of a man who had hit the bottom. "Dad, I want to become the man my mom hoped I'd be, and the kind of man you can be proud of, not because of money, but because of how I live." Not an apology, a commitment. I took an envelope from my jacket and set it on the table. "This is the 12-month boundary contract. Conditions straight as steel. No asking for money, no borrowing money, no rescues, no hiding, absolute respect. A single violation, relationship ends immediately." Evan signed without hesitation. I looked at Marissa. "You signed too." She nodded and sighed. That night, leaving their apartment, I didn't carry full trust, but I carried something I thought I'd lost, a thread of hope. And there was still one last thing I needed to do: protect the legacy. Late December in the Tillamook forest has a kind of golden light, as clear as pine honey, slipping through the branches and spilling onto the damp ground, as if stitching back together the pieces of life that had been torn apart. I drove the old Ford along Highway 6, past the wet earth curves, toward the wooden cabin I entered escrow on 21 days ago and closed on just yesterday. Not to give away, not to rescue anyone, but to keep for myself, for the first time in years. The cabin stood on a low rise with a dark timbered roof, windows facing the valley that filters the sound of the Tillamook River. Not big, not fancy, but enough for a 62-year-old man to set down the aches he'd carried from being dismissed for far too long. 2 days earlier, I sat with Harold Kim in his small office on NE Broadway, updating my will. Evan remained the beneficiary, but everything now passes through the Aldridge Family Trust. Nothing falls straight into his hands. He receives only after proving 12 full months of responsible living, with no repeat of any past failure. Love remains, but from here on it is placed inside structure, not sentiment, not weakness. Harold added Deborah to the permanent block list, warning that any further contact would be escalated as harassment. A quiet ending, but a final one. Evan paid the remaining balance on time. The first month right on the day, the second month early, and the third month he added an email. "I'm okay. I'm handling everything on my own now." Marissa kept going to therapy and sometimes sent measured messages. "Thank you for giving us the chance to fix this." I replied only, "Keep going." That was enough. When I stepped onto the Tillamook cabin porch, turned the key and opened the wooden door, the forest light washed in like a greeting. I stood at the threshold with one hand on the frame, breathing the damp pine, feeling the warmth of that light settle across my face, and my chest loosened the way it used to when I finally set down the air tank after a long firefighting shift. I spoke slowly, to the forest, to Linda, and to myself. I forgive, but I do not forget, and from now on, no one enters my life without bringing respect with them. The cabin stayed silent, but it was the kind of silence that agrees, the kind of peace no one can buy, no one can take, and no one can insult. Every journey has a moment when you have to stop, look back, and choose how to move forward. For me, that moment happened right at the cabin door in the Tillamook forest, where damp pine air and late-day gold blended into a stillness I can't fully name. No more accusations, no more contemptful glances in crowded aisles, no more shoulders bearing the weight of misplaced expectations. Only me, the forest, and the simple truth that took half a lifetime to learn. Anyone who doesn't value you does not deserve to walk beside you. And when the cabin door closed behind me, I realized I had opened another one, where peace isn't given by anyone else, but kept by me. If this chapter made you think even a little, leave a single and tell me where you're listening from. If you want to walk with me through the next stories, those slices of family, boundaries, kindness, and dignity, you can hit follow. Thank you for staying until the end. As long as you're still here, I'll keep telling the story.